Welcome. So today we're going to talk about enabling Anthos to provide you a consistent operational experience across multiple clouds. But before we get started, why don't we do a quick round of intros? So my name is Allan. I work on product for Anthos.
And Kyle Bassett from Arctiq, Google partner, has been working with Anthos for a couple years now.
Yeah. So again, the objective of the session is really to demonstrate how Anthos can provide a common experience across hybrid and multi-cloud. And before we get started, let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about multi-cloud and the challenges with operating in a multi-cloud environment. As all of you know, most companies that we talk to typically tell us that when they're moving to the public cloud, they oftentimes want to really transform the way they do things. And oftentimes, having a multi-cloud strategy is very important, right? You don't want to lock yourself into particular clouds. So when you talk to various organizations across many industries, being able to have that portability and run across multiple clouds and on-prem is one of their top priorities. And it's not just multi-cloud. Every organization I talk to typically has applications that need to run in the cloud, but then there's a lot of applications that have to run on-prem. Out of curiosity, how many people here have apps that literally run in pretty much every environment? Yeah, that's what I thought. So why multi-cloud? Some of the common use cases and reasons that we see people using multi-cloud are as follows. Number one, every cloud has its superpowers, right? Google, we like to pride ourselves with Kubernetes and machine learning and analytics. Other cloud providers have their own superpowers. Perhaps you want to be able to extend your application into different geographies. Maybe you want to run your application close to where the data lives. Perhaps you don't want vendor lock-in. You want to be able to pick the right cloud, negotiate across different vendors, and be able to move your application from one environment to the other. I've seen cases where applications are run across different clouds from a resiliency standpoint. You've got your primary in one cloud, and then your backup failover in another cloud. And then there are cases where organizations acquire companies, and companies use different technologies that run on different clouds, but you want to really be able to manage these different applications without increasing your operational overhead. Now, with doing all that, there's challenges. The common challenge that I see out there is as you start running in multi-cloud environments, you start seeing cluster sprawl. And you start getting into a situation where you're building a platform on top of a platform to have to manage these various environments. You start to build siloed teams that focus on operations in each one of these environments. Kubernetes does a very good job at abstracting away the underlying runtime and infrastructure, but then what about operations? What about monitoring, logging, auditing, security, networking? Oftentimes every cloud provider does things a little bit differently. So when you implement a multi-cloud strategy, all of a sudden your operational expenditure starts to go up, right? So this is why we developed Anthos, right? Anthos is our platform that enables you to run and operate your applications across hybrid and multi-cloud in a consistent fashion. Oftentimes, people think a lot about day one experience, getting the environment up and running, but the challenge really is around keeping the environment up and running. It's really around day two. How do you do upgrades? How do you ensure your environment's secure? How do you build a platform engineering team that can serve applications and deploy them in the right cloud or right environment without having to use 10 different tools? How do you simplify your environment in such a way where you're more productive? That's what Anthos is bringing to the table. At its core is Kubernetes through Google Kubernetes Engine. And then on top of Kubernetes, we provide an ability to run config as code that enables you to be able to apply configuration across clusters that are running in any environment. And then on top of all that, we provide a very sophisticated service management capability that enables you to start building an SRE practice and offer SRE features and experience without having to use 5 different tools and extend that across multiple clouds and on-premise. So in today's talk, we wanted to do something a little bit different, right? Rather than just show you slides, we want to show you this in action. So Kyle, why don't you show us how to onboard on Anthos and make this real?
Yeah, cool. So I think what we're going to do is focus on lots of demos today, so hopefully the demo guides are good. We have some backup plans if they're not, I think. But I'll walk you through. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you what we built, and we're going to kind of move it up from the ground up. We're going to have the Kubernetes layer, and then we're going to kind of stack it up from there. To tee things up, Allan talked about config management. So one of the biggest parts, I think, with a lot of my customers, when they're replatforming, they're starting to look at how operations is going to work and how changes are going to get introduced into the environment. One of the big principles we have is everything should be done through code. So you've probably heard of GitOps and the GitOps approaches. So everything we're going to do on these clusters today is all going to be through check-ins through Git, and it's going to push everything to the clusters. So no more jumping on clusters, running kubectl commands. We have a source of truth that's going to be in Git, and the workflow is regardless if it's on-prem or in another cloud or in GKE, we're going to be pushing out consistent policy across this. And we're going to deploy an application, we're going to shift a bunch of Istio rules around, we're going to manipulate an app a little bit. And the whole idea is it's this common experience. So we've got GKE that everyone knows and loves, it's been around for a long time in cloud. Now we're able to run this on-prem, and I have a VMware environment we're running this on. And we're going to also run this in another cloud, the fairly popular one that you'll probably recognize. And we'll be able to show you how we can make these things look the same and then start to shift traffic around. We're going to use, if you've heard of the Hipster Store, so Google has a microservices application that you can all use. It's a cloud-native app. It's made up of a bunch of microservices. It allows us to scale different components. We're going to deploy this all through code. And essentially the use case, you can probably tell I'm Canadian, so I've used a few different regions of Canada, so hopefully we're not dealing with too much latency across the pond, but I'm pretty sure Google's got a good network that can handle that for us. What we're doing is, if you look at this middle cluster, this is our on-prem cluster. This is running in VMware in the States in a bare metal service. It's going to deploy the entire application. So all of these microservices are going to be deployed in that cluster. The other cluster, the Canadian cluster to the left, I guess, is where we're just going to deploy the front-end services. And that one's running on GCP in a Canadian region. The cluster to the right is actually running in AWS, so it's a GKE cluster, an Anthos cluster running in AWS. We're also deploying front-end services there, and I figured it wouldn't be right if we didn't stand up a UK cluster and push some workload to it. So the idea is we have front-end services that we're able to scale up. Think of like a retail use case where you have a lot of load coming in, but we're keeping all our data private. We're behind a private cloud, and that's where our data sets are and all of those pieces.
And keep in mind, everything we're showing here is using a common set of tools.
So tee up the use case for you. We're going to go through 3 different use cases, and think of it, we're going to build from the ground up, and then we're going to start to layer on some services, things like Istio, Anthos Service Mesh. We're going to talk about day 2 ops. So multi-cluster, we're going to use GitOps. We're leveraging the Hipster Store. We're going to start with 3 clusters, and then I'm going to show you how we can add a 4th cluster just by a simple config change. We're going to light up Istio Service Mesh on every node that comes up. So every pod we scale joins the mesh and can communicate across all these clouds. And I'll show you a little bit of the VMware stuff as well in the AWS setup. So let's get into it. So maybe first thing I'll do is I'll show you what this looks like in GKE. Or in GCP. So one nice thing about Anthos is we've got clusters in AWS, we've got clusters on-prem, but we're managing all through the GCP console. It's our single pane of glass. We're able to see what's going on in here. We're able to interact with this. So a lot of the operations teams or people that want to contribute, they don't have to learn kubectl. They can leverage the web UI and have this experience through this. So.
Yeah, and these are GKE clusters. So if you build your application on Google Cloud on GKE, you can basically just move it around from every one of these environments.
So I've got a label set on these. So you can see I've got a cluster in AWS. I've got the Hipster Store in Canada. I've got a UK cluster, and I've got my on-prem cluster. If we dive into my on-prem cluster, you can see the nodes that I have. So I've got 5 nodes, and we can scale these nodes up, we can scale these nodes down if we want. If we go into our vSphere environment, you can see this is a 3-node bare metal cluster. This is broken out into my user cluster. So these are the nodes that you just saw. This is a pretty standard vCenter setup. We're just using a regular vSwitch. We're leveraging data stores. We can carve out persistent volumes dynamically. Everything that you have in GKE is ported into this view. So we'll dive more into the GCP view in a little bit when the day 2 operation stuff gets in, but let me show you what the clusters look like. So I'm doing a watch command on the hipster store namespace. It doesn't happen to exist yet because I haven't deployed it. So just to show you, we're not doing any smoke and mirrors yet, but we've got our UK cluster, we've got our AWS cluster, we've got our Canada cluster, and then we've got our on-prem cluster. And you can look at this, you can interact with it just like you would any other cluster. So if we look at our nodes, there's the same nodes you saw in VMware.
Live demo, he's got guts.
Well, that didn't look too good. Well, let's fix that. So there's my Canadian cluster, and you'll see the same thing. We just have 3 nodes. I'm on a budget, so we went minimum size possible. So the other piece what I want to explain to you is, we'll get into this later, but you'll see everyone's part of a service mesh. So we've got, when I went back to the diagram earlier, we've got gateways in front of all these clusters. So if we look at the namespaces, you're going to see we have a gateway, and these things are in sync. We've got one cluster here that's not set, and that's because we haven't authenticated it. So that's the UK cluster. It's trying to join, but we haven't authenticated it. So it's in the mesh, but it's not going to be participating very nicely at this point in time. What we're going to do here is I've already deployed the configuration management operator to all these clusters. So we've got an operator that is the Anthos config management, but we haven't told it to do anything yet. So that namespace will just be empty. What we've got here is I've got a simple shell script, and I'm going to run this. And what you can see is all I'm doing is this defines my on-prem cluster. So I'm just telling it, you're going to sync with this Git repo, you're going to sync with this branch, and you're going to use SSH to do the authentication. And then you can see I've got the exact same little chunk of code for Canada. I'm not using the US cluster anymore. I don't have my UK one, and there's my AWS cluster. So we'll add the UK one later, but just to give you a feel for what the code looks like, it is literally this simple. All clusters are blank right now. All I've done is deployed the operator. So if I go back here, this is just a Git repo I pulled down, that same repo you saw, and I'm going to run the script. So what it's going to do is it's going to look to see what is available to push this out to. We've got 3 clusters, so it go ahead and pushes out config management to those 3 clusters. And what you're going to see happen, we go back and do our watch, pods start coming up already. So within a couple seconds, the clusters said, we've got a syncer, it looks at the repo and says, what am I supposed to be? So immediately, as you can see, this is my on-prem. It's going to get every service. And if we do a watch on this cluster, we just got our front ends. And same thing with this. So essentially, we got on-prem with everything, front ends in the cloud. So now if we need to scale things, I can show you that example. I'll save myself typing, and we'll do some copy-paste. So this is my AWS cluster. Let's scale that up 10 nodes. So we've scaled it. We do a watch on that. You'll be able to see all these nodes will come up. So now we've got 10 more front-end nodes. You can also do this through the GCP console that I showed you, so you don't have to do it through kubectl.
So we brought up all these environments using Anthos config management. So think of the ability to bring up ephemeral clusters and then get those clusters running with the right software on top of them, all using configuration.
We might as well scale up all the clusters. We're already paying for the infrastructure, so. So in this case, you see I've scaled up all my front ends to 10. I just threw 5 in the other cluster. And we don't have anything in our UK cluster yet, because it was commented out in that code block that we had. And we'll get into this piece later, but you can see my service mesh got very busy. So every one of these pods that came up, it joined the mesh, and now front end knows how to talk to cart service, knows how to talk to back end, no DNS changes, no IPs, not worrying about any of that stuff. So from a developer perspective, you can code these services and you know that this service needs to talk to checkout service, payment service. You don't have to worry about IPs and routing and networking. You just define a service. If you scale it up, in a lot of these cases, we'd probably use a horizontal pod scaler, something that we're going to recognize load and then scale up. In this case, we're just showing it manually. So that's the build side of things. Maybe we'll jump into the operations stuff a little bit, Allan, and then we can show some more in the demos.
Let's talk about operations, and it's really important in terms of what Kyle just showcased, right? From a platform operator standpoint, I've gotten an ability now to create a cluster, to provision a cluster with the right configuration. I have a lot of the cluster lifecycle management capabilities that are provided to me. I could take advantage of Anthos for a lot of the day 2 cluster upgrades, security patching, node repair, all those capabilities that oftentimes are very hard to do. Anthos brings to me as a platform operator. And when we think about some of the core benefits that Anthos provides, one concept that resonates really well with companies that are really going down the path of modern application, cloud native, is this whole notion of separation of concerns, right? Oftentimes, previously, there's a lot of friction that exists between developers, between IT, between security admins, and one of the core areas that we're providing value with Anthos is to make this a collaborative process, right? The whole idea is an application owner basically creates a build, pushes it over, has a platform operator now, can define configurations, can push it into staging. A security admin comes along before it goes into production, can apply guardrails, define those guardrails as policies as code, and then have that basically be in place before any application hits production. All of that is collaborative in nature, and we've designed Anthos in such a way where we can truly meet you where you are. If you have an existing CI/CD that you use, we can plug into it. But at the end of the day, it's really about bringing that collaboration together across all these various roles. So why don't we show how all that stuff works?
All right, so we all know when we do new stuff, some people get to do the fun stuff and build it, and then someone's got to fix the leaky pipes when it's done. So day 2 ops is always hard. You're not alone. These new platforms are rolling out, are really changing how we ran infrastructure in the past, and I see certain teams, sometimes we have like an SRE team or a DevOps team who's doing the build and support, but in many large organizations, we still have to hand it over to the operations team, which means training, documentation, lots of stuff. And if that falls down, it can be a huge challenge. And you could have done a lot of great work on the build side, but if you haven't provided the ops teams the tools, the knowledge, the ability to troubleshoot, stuff like that, it can really fall apart. And I coin it kind of the wall of confusion sometimes, as you're throwing stuff over to teams and they're not enabled. If anything I can recommend is if you're building new platforms, bring the different groups in early. Bring security, bring networking, bring ops. Let them be part of this, and then when they receive it to support it, when dev teams are on or SRE teams are on to build something new, they're going to really care for it as much as you did. So, that's the culture conditioning side of tech, and tech is sometimes the easy part, and the people side of what we do is sometimes a little more challenging. So what we're going to do now is, I showed you a little bit of the GKE console. We're using less kubectl, which is always good. Less YAML is probably better. I think we'd get a few cheers out of that one. We're going to scale up some pods. We're going to push our code out to that UK cluster so it can be part of this environment. We'll show you some Stackdriver integration. These are all the tools you're going to need to be able to manage these environments, monitoring, logging. And we'll do some destructive stuff. And we'll show you the power of config management and how it can be that source of truth to recover things back. Anything you'd add to that, Allan? Other challenges we keep running into?
Yeah, we end up oftentimes running into situations where people take for granted the complexity of the day 2 side of the house, especially as it pertains to situations where clusters aren't configured properly, and typically if you don't have a networking parameter configured, all of a sudden things break, but you're unable to figure out and pinpoint what went wrong. So a lot of what we're showing you here has to do with preventative controls as well to ensure that your configuration is done the right way.
Yeah, I look at it like get that foundation built really solid, and then you'll be able to build up from there. So our store's up. We can buy cool hipster stuff. I didn't have time to get the toques delivered, or else we would have had these available for people, but you can see that it's pretty snappy. Again, this is all hitting my on-prem cluster. I've scaled up my workloads in the cloud, but I haven't pushed any traffic to them yet, so they're sitting kind of on standby. Let's go ahead and push things out to that UK cluster. Let's let it kind of participate in this. So normally, you would jump on the command line and you would run a bunch of YAML files and probably deal with a bunch of space issues and things like that. So what we're going to do in this case, you probably remember the look of this file when I showed you it in VS Code. This is our definition for our clusters. So I've got a plain Jane UK cluster that I haven't really done anything with. All I'm going to do is uncomment this section, commit this. Yes, I'm committing to master. That's a no-no, but for demos, it's okay.
And every one of these clusters has what's called a config management controller that's running and is in sync with the Git repo. So anytime there's a change, it'll automatically pick it up and apply.
So the other thing we might as well do is we might as well change some traffic around. So this is my Istio configuration. If you're familiar with Istio, Istio can do traffic shaping and be able to do redirections and things like that. So again, this is all declarative. It's all in my Git repo. You can see here I've got 100% of my traffic going to my on-prem cluster. I've got 0% of my traffic going to my remote cluster. So I'll wait on this change. Let's go ahead and bring that UK cluster into the mix here. So the first thing I'm going to do is do a git pull. I made a code change, so there's my code change. And then I'm just going to set up hipster again. So since it's declarative, it's going to know that I have clusters that don't have any changes, so it doesn't change them. But you notice it created this other cluster. It created this other definition, and that's our UK cluster. So if we do the watch on that, in the next minute or so, we should see that front-end pod start to come up. There you go. It's starting to come up. So you might as well scale it up too. We'll let that finish. While that's finishing, let's go ahead and push this traffic shaping rule. So when I showed you earlier, the hipster store, keep an eye on this top bar right here, because I've got a different Docker file loading all my cloud clusters. So if we go back to Git, we'll go commit this change. All right, we'll try again. I see what's going on. All right. We're still at 100. Let's do the edit.
So just to summarize, we have two front ends, one running on GKE and Google Cloud, another running on AWS, and we're shifting traffic between one so that we're having requests coming in 50% on AWS and 50% on Google Cloud, hitting the back end that's running on VMware in a data center somewhere.
So there's our front ends are up now. We should be able to scale those. So right now we got 10 there. We got 10 front ends here. We've got another 10 there. So what we should be able to see now is if we go back to our hipster store and we do some jumping around, there's our remote starting to show up. So what's happening here is Allan said we're splitting traffic actually between on-prem and our clusters in the cloud. So you can start to steer traffic, you can start to do a lot of these capabilities, A/B testing. What I see a lot of customers doing is they're actually staging full clusters. They get their environment ready, they get all the testing done, they do this during the day, and then they pick a time to cut over the load balancer. And they enjoy their Sunday nights with their family instead of doing releases and pushing out new code and crossing your fingers that it's working. All right, so let's do a little bit more day two ops, and then we'll get into the service mesh pieces. So, as I said, there's lots of tools in GCP. All the clusters are going to be managed through here. The nice part is you can go into workloads. It's going to aggregate all this stuff for you. So you can start to look at cluster You can start to mine through different clusters, and in this case, we'll look at our UK cluster, we'll look at our namespace, and if I type properly.
And while Kyle's setting that up, we also have a marketplace, an operator marketplace. So you can basically go find the operator, lots of third-party open source software, and then you can point to any one of these GKE clusters, regardless of where they're running, and deploy the operator.
So live demos, I didn't have this happen before, but again, it's pretty hard to dive in kubectl, get logs, pod name, all of that stuff. I can get all my error messages and all my logs here. I can see what's going on with this front-end service. You can get all your telemetry, all your metrics through here. You can look at your labels. You can see what's going on the Istio side. You can see your cluster front end. So with these pieces, you can really use the GCP console to be able to do this without having to be mucking around in your clusters all the time. Now, there are probably times to do it, but I would recommend doing all that in dev, putting it into a repo, testing it, and then getting people to do all their changes through a GitOps workflow. You do a PR, you do a peer review, push it out, and you're going to get consistency. So you can tell, if I have 4 clusters I'm managing here, I could manage 100 clusters. It would be the same amount of work for me other than just managing that one config file.
Yeah, and Google with Anthos, we're providing support with Anthos. So a lot of the master logs are being aggregated through Stackdriver so that when you open up a support ticket, right, our support team can have visibility into the issues, right, and help proactively troubleshoot, so you're not waiting, a long time.
I wasn't going to do this, Allan, but let's do it anyway. You can also deploy stuff from Marketplace, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So this
I was
may
describing earlier.
not work. I think it'll work. Let's hope for the best.
Are you sure?
Something's got to go wrong.
It's risky. He's taking a chance right now.
So I had a customer last week run SonarQube. They have a hard time deploying it, and I showed them this demo, and they thought it was pretty cool because now they can provide self-service to teams. They just go into the marketplace. They're able to deploy stuff into their on-prem clusters. I think my connection's a little slow, but we'll cut through it as best we can. While that's loading, it loaded. So in this case, I'm able to choose my cluster. So in this case, I'm going to choose my on-prem cluster. I'm going to say I want to create a new namespace. I'm going to deploy SonarQube, and then I'll deploy that. What that's going to do is instruct my cluster to be able to go pull the YAMLs, pull the containers, and deploy them. One of the things we forgot to talk about was every cluster has an agent called GK Connect. It runs as a set of pods, and it runs an outbound connection and wires you up to GCP. That's how we're getting all this telemetry. So no inbound connection, it's a secure connection out. You go through a proxy, put it through a firewall, whatever you want. But that's your lifeline to be able to get all this data out and also be able to give API calls on the inside.
Yeah, and this is how you're able to see all the clusters show up in the GKE console, is through this GKE Connect agent that's running on those target clusters.
So we'll let that finish. Guess it's still rolling away. All right, so other stuff you're going to care about if you're doing day 2 ops. Monitoring. Everything default integrates with Stackdriver, so we're going to send cluster logs up. That doesn't mean you have to send application logs up. A lot of people like to keep their application logs local. We can configure FluentD or something like that to be able to send to Elk internally. You can send logs wherever you want. But by default, you're going to get monitoring, you're going to get logging into this environment. So you're able to go in and look at all the things that are happening in your cluster, start to dive into these. You get a real-time stream of all your logs. So this is a great way to troubleshoot. You can aggregate by cluster, by pod, whatever you want. The other piece that I think is really interesting, if no one's ever looked at Stackdriver Trace, you can start to get a lot of tracing capabilities with this data. So you can start to dive into like latency. What's the latency across microservices? And we're going to get into a little bit about this when we talk about the service mesh. But just data is power, and just graphing data and giving people read-only tools to your teams probably gets you off the phone a lot of people saying my cluster's slow, but you send them to go look themselves, and then when they come to you, they have an intelligent set of data for you to start to troubleshoot. So you can start to dive into all these things. Why is this running at 450 milliseconds? You get all the tracing, you can dive in. and you can really start drilling down. And you can dive in and see the exact traces all the way through every call of your microservices application. Troubleshooting this stuff through command line is next to impossible, as you can imagine. And we don't have the tools like tapping a network like we used to anymore and go to the network team. We're able to kind of get this in line all through our GCP console. I think we should dive into the service mesh pieces, Allan.
Yeah, let's do that. The next demo we're going to show you is really around service management and observability.
I'll catch up.
We got our slides up there.
There we go.
All right. This is where Anthos Service Mesh comes in. So Anthos Service Mesh is built on top of Istio. You can easily, when you configure Anthos Service Mesh, every service that you spin up has a Envoy sidecar proxy that gives you this ability now to do advanced traffic management. Kubernetes does a good job at load balancing traffic across pods, but then suppose you want to do more advanced patterns like routing 80% of traffic here, spinning up a new version, trickling requests to the newer version. A lot of that is things that Envoy really can help with. Anthos Service Mesh also provides you the ability to get observability into what's going on with all these services that you have deployed. It's really hard building services that live on top of different clusters, different environments, and have them connect them together and stitch them together and get uniform observability across all these environments. That's what we're trying to do here with Anthos is, provide you that control point in the cloud that makes it easy to run these open source software like Istio and Kubernetes in varying environments. And then finally, as a security admin, I can define policy as code, push it as config, and then be able to define rules around how my services are supposed to talk to each other. What are my ingress and egress policies? What can't services talk to? And I can do that in a consistent fashion across all this environment. So why don't we show this in action?
All right, so I'm going to steal one of Kelsey's terms, but this is, what I'm going to show you first is Istio the hard way. So we've deployed Istio on our own into these clusters. We're using Envoy on the way in. You've seen we've got mutual TLS set up. We've got certificate manager wired up to do all our auto rotation. We're integrating with Let's Encrypt. Everything's multi-site, so you've seen everything joins the service mesh as we spin up nodes, take nodes down. The application discovery pieces are looked after. So if you bring up a new microservice and you define it as Kyle's payment service, it'll find it. There's a routing mechanism inside of Istio, and if we have things failing, it'll reroute traffic, so it'll look after those pieces for us. We showed you a little bit of Istio pieces on the traffic shaping when we did the 50-50 rule earlier. Istio is really a whole bunch of capabilities and projects, and Allan kind of covered the base capabilities. The other piece that Google's bringing to the table is Anthos Service Mesh. So I'm going to show you kind of the open source way to run this. That does come with the burden of managing it and looking after it, care and feeding for it. Then I'm going to show you what Google's bringing with Anthos Service Mesh and how they're bringing all these tools together.
And keep in mind, to actually do everything that Kyle is showing oftentimes requires 5 or 6 different tools. We're showing you a way of being able to do it in a one common platform that gives you all these various capabilities.
So we forgot to show the whole destructive part last in the ops part, so we got some time. Let's cover that too. Come on, internet. All right, one of these clusters is going to behave. Okay. This namespace here, it's the one we created through our config management repo. It's our application. It's our, probably next to, well, it's probably the most important namespace because if it's not there, we just have a cluster doing nothing. So normally, you wouldn't want people to just go and delete your namespaces because they're pretty much deleting everything in your cluster. We're going to do it anyway. All right.
And again, much of this is Istio the hard way. With Anthos Service Mesh, we simplify this whole process by providing a control plane that runs in Google Cloud, that you no longer have to do things manually and deploy separate control planes in every environment.
Okay, so we're terminating this namespace. We're basically deleting everything that's in it. And what you're going to see after, it takes longer to terminate it than it does to recreate it. So once this thing goes terminating, namespace is going to go away, and it's going to, there we go, came all the way back up. Took 1 second. And then if we go in and watch the pods again, there's our pod running.
Yeah. And that was Anthos config manager in action.
That's config manager in action. That pod's going to join the service mesh again. If you notice anything in this, we only have one pod running. I had scaled those up to 10. These other clusters have 10. The reason that is because our source of truth says you need to run one pod. We didn't overwrite it because we want to allow clusters to scale, but we also, it just shows it's reading it off the Git repo. So that was one pod. So if everything gets deleted, we're going to bring it back up to 1, and then you can scale it back up. That's a good reason to use Google's horizontal pod scalers and things like that. And you can see we've joined the mesh. Everyone's happy again. So let's dive in. I think let's show off some of the Istio pieces. What do you think, Allan? So one of the things that we're shipping with Istio, why don't we show you the config first? How are we doing on time? We're good. So we got this namespace called Istio system. We've got a bunch of stuff deployed in there. Oh, there we go.
Oh, lost power.
That was interesting. All right, we're back. That was a good test. All right, so this is my on-prem cluster. I've got a lot more Istio components because this is the one that's running all my telemetry and everything. If you look at the other clusters, it's just going to have a couple components. By default, we deploy Grafana. So by default, you're getting all the metrics as soon as we deploy Istio. So we've got nice Grafana dashboards. You know, we can drill in. You can see this was me testing before the event. We deleted our clusters and we brought it back up. So you can start to slice and dice into all of this. You can also choose which dashboard you want to look at. So lots of good stuff there. This is the cool stuff that we're getting to now. So if you haven't heard of Kiali, Kiali is a mechanism that's going to give us a lot of telemetry and a lot of tracing. It's an open source tool. It's part of Istio. And you can see it's automatically picked up our namespace here. So it knows we've got pods running. We can start to dive into all these. You can see health checks, statistics. You can also see logs. Really anything you want to be able to see here, get integrated graphing. The really cool part is since these are in the Istio service mesh, we're getting telemetry off of this information without doing any development work. So we did not have to tell our devs to change their application. All we did is we inserted a sidecar into every one of our pods. So when we look back in this piece here, if we look at one of these environments, you can see we have two containers running. One of them's the front end, the other one's a sidecar. So all the traffic that comes to these pods is being collected, and we're getting it with Istio, which gives us lots of information. One of the coolest things you can start to do is you can turn on the traffic animation. So we've got a load generator running against this environment. You can see I've got a load generator hitting the front end. You can start to dive in and see how many milliseconds, things like that, response codes, what's my service uptime. You could start to slice and dice by different times. Gives you all this information. We can also look at the Istio namespace, and we can overlay the Istio namespace onto our store. So the Istio namespace is down here. So this is all just out of the box. So when people say I'm not ready for Istio, I generally say at least deploy sidecars. You're going to get an awful lot of information. You're going to be able to share this with your dev teams. They don't need to make any code changes. They don't need to really know about it. And you start to get telemetry.
Yeah, one really important value you can get out of this is suppose you've got a monolith that you want to break up into microservices, but you don't know where to start, right? Throw an Envoy proxy in front of a VM. Start to collect traffic patterns and gives you an idea of what parts of the monolith you can start focusing on first.
Yeah, so as you know, this information is very hard to get. With Istio, it's just in line of the traffic of the network, so you're going to get all these services. It knows what the service is based on headers, things like that. So this is this is open source. This comes out of the box. But what you've seen is we've got lots of different tools. So this is Jaeger interface. Similar to what I showed you with Stackdriver Trace, you can see we can start to dive into our microservices. I would start to look at this. What's this? Why is this slow? I can start to dive in, say, there's my sidecar. What service is running? What port's it running on? What's it doing? I can start to slice and dice time zones. Everything kind of updates real time, so you can really start to dig into what's going on. So these are really great tools while you're developing. As you're building, you should be looking at this, build a baseline. As you recode, see if it's getting better, see if it's getting worse. If you do a release, baseline it on the Monday. See if your code has affected your website. All these things can really come in handy. All right, so you saw that it can be pretty hard to build all this, manage all this stuff also. So let's show you ASM. So what you're going to recognize here is you saw a lot of graphs. You saw the little dots that showed latency. They were all different tools. So what Google's bringing to the table with ASM is taking all those open source tools and putting them back into the service and allowing you to manage all this through a service. And Allan, I know you're talking to a lot of people about ASM, and what's the biggest impact people want to get out of this from a...
The ability to define error budgets, SLIs, SLOs across the service, get visibility around all these traffic patterns. We hear a lot from customers that just are interested in building SRE functions and need the right tool set to enable it, and we find ASM really resonates in that journey.
So you can see it's automatically picked up the services that I've deployed, knows about them. In this case, we've set up a few SLOs, so we want to know, are our microservices violating any of this? So since we know how long it takes our front end to talk to this service, or one I would probably care about is my checkout, my payment service, stuff that's going to affect the customer and cost you revenue. What you can start to do is you can start to build budgets around this stuff. So we're really starting to see the business value of this. So this is a piece where someone from the business can start to come in and define what's important to the business. They don't have to know the deep level tech side. We're collecting all the telemetry. We can give them the telemetry. We've got a baseline. So if our customers were happy last week and then we did a code change and they're not happy this week, I'm pretty sure latency went up, something started to fall apart. So we've got insight into that now.
Yeah, and where this becomes super important is as you're going down this journey, right, to cloud native, and you start building this SRE function, and you start in some ways reducing OpEx costs. Question comes up is how do you measure that OpEx reduction? The hope is by providing tools like this, you can actually start to measure and show value.
Yeah, so you can see this service is out of budget. This is a different cluster we have set up that is misbehaving on purpose. One of the things we didn't mention is circuit breaking is another component of Istio that people are very interested in. So being able to break services for testing and be able to see if things are going to route properly, fault tolerance, stuff like that. So in here you can start to see our latency's off. I can create an alerting policy, integrate it with Stackdriver. So now I could say I don't want my front-end card service to be any more than 300 milliseconds to my back end. If it ever violates that policy, send an alert. The other thing you can start to do is you can aggregate stuff of, there's great things about monitoring systems, but when they get too noisy, everybody ignores them. So you can start to say, don't send it after 300 milliseconds, wait a minute and then do the aggregate over that minute and then send an alert. So you can start to aggregate stuff together. So we can go, it'll jump us in to create an alerting policy right into Stackdriver. So integrated alerting, which is kind of nice. You could certainly integrate this into a ServiceNow workflow or something like that, whatever you're using. If we jump back into some of these other screens, you'll start to see it starts to look a little bit like the other pieces I was showing you as far as being able to view the application. Let me try pulling up a new window here.
Are you going to show them the topology view?
Yeah, we'll show the topology view. So it starts to look a little bit like Kiali. We've got the topology view, but we'll also get our alerts showing up. So this would be great in an ops center on the screen. You can start to jump in, dive in. One of the really things you can start to do is you can start to enable side-by-side. So then you can start to trace over time and compare side-by-side comparisons of your entire environment. So we did a release yesterday. Why is it worse today? Things like that start to kind of give you a lot of insight. You can start to do a side-by-side compare via this view. So I can start to look at these services. So if it was green and then red later, I could dive into that, then dive into the logs. So lots of capabilities there. And then you've obviously got your table view. You can filter by budget. And in this case, we also have a couple that are set up that are doing well. So they're green, so they're passing. So the other thing is people are asking you, your customers are asking you, what kind of uptime do you provide? You've got real telemetry to prove to them that you're providing the uptime that you need to provide. And if someone calls and says, you haven't been doing it, it's most likely their internet connection if this is, because this is getting it right from the source, right from the cluster view. And we got a couple minutes left, but just, you don't have to be an expert to use these tools. They're pretty intuitive. You can give people read-only access to them. Let them start playing around. As you can see, we've got full metrics, latency reports. We can dive into the time. We can drill down. You can start to break down by different protocols, things like that. Diagnostics will allow us to get into the logs. So we can see we've had some errors in this. So we can dive in and see what's going on there. And again, like I showed you before, you can open right into the log from this pod that's been misbehaving, and I can bring it right back into my GCP console, into Stackdriver, and then start to really look at what's going on. I can also look at older logs, so if I want to look at what was going on yesterday, you can do that. So I think that's it for the demo, Allan. Let's wrap it up. We got a couple minutes left. There we go.
All right. So
sorry, Allan. I would cover this first.
You want to talk a bit about the future?
So this is what I'm going to build next, or my team's going to build next, because I surely didn't build all of this. I showed you bringing traffic into an on-prem cluster, and then we're distributing across the mesh. I think the real dream is you start to use things like Traffic Director, have clusters in different places. When someone from Japan calls my URL, I send them to the Japan cluster. When someone in Canada calls, send them to there. Why are we crossing the pond for all of this stuff? The other thing we can start to do is, obviously data and state is important. Start to use services like Spanner. Now you can actually distribute clusters and distribute data sets. So we hopefully will give you a sneak peek at this in April, maybe in San Francisco.
Yeah, and keep in mind, unique thing about Google Cloud is we have a global network, right? So you can expose a VIP that can route across different regions. So you don't have to poke firewall rules between regions and do all that complicated stuff. So to summarize, everything we showed you today is the value and experience that we're bringing forth with Anthos. Anthos is software-based, 100% software-based. So we're not selling you hardware. We're providing you software that you can run on your existing hardware. We're working very closely with all the various OEM partners out there to come up with reference architectures. Anthos is also 100% open API. As I mentioned, everything we build on is open source, Kubernetes and Istio, and we're providing a control point running in Google Cloud that makes a lot of the day two operations something you don't have to worry about, right? We want to take care of that and enable you to build value on top of it. Third thing is really around flexible operations, right? And portable and consistent. We're really addressing this whole notion of being able to use a single tool set across different environments, all the way from the Kubernetes layer up to the service management layer. And then finally, this whole notion of GitOps and configuration as code is something that's built into the DNA of Anthos. Everything we do with Anthos is based on declarative. This whole notion of being able to provide your desired state and have the system basically ensure that the actual state is your desired state. I'll just wrap it up with, our goal here is to meet you where you are, whether you're running 100% virtual machine today or you're going down the Kubernetes journey, right? We think Anthos is a starting point that can enable you to go down that modernization journey for cloud native. So we will be around for the next, 10 minutes. If you have any questions, come on up. There is a survey, if you want to show it. You can fill out. We gave you a live demo. Give us a good score.
Yeah, if you give us good scores, you may get to see that other cool demo in April. So.
Yeah. And thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.